The moment my husband looked me straight in the eye and said, "She's not your daughter, so don't tell her what to do," something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not heartbroken, just done. He thought those words would remind me of my place, that after 3 years of marriage, I was nothing more than the woman who paid the bills but had no right to expect respect. What he didn't realize was that the life he enjoyed, the beautiful house, the expensive school, the riding lessons, the designer clothes, was standing on a foundation I had built. And foundations can disappear. My name is Natalie, I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how one sentence changed everything. If you've ever watched someone destroy their own comfortable life because of pride, you'll understand exactly what happened next. For most people, I looked like I had the perfect life. I worked as a senior finance executive, handling budgets worth millions of dollars every year. My job demanded long hours, careful planning, and tough decisions. Ironically, managing my own household turned out to be far more complicated than managing an entire company's finances. When I married Daniel, I knew he came with a teenage daughter, Emma. She was 11 back then, still adjusting after her parents' divorce. I never expected her to see me as her mother. I only hoped we could eventually become a family built on trust and mutual respect. I gave it everything I had. I drove her to school when Daniel couldn't. I attended every school event. I remembered birthdays, bought thoughtful gifts, helped with homework, and celebrated every small achievement like it mattered to me, because it did. But somewhere along the way, kindness became expectation. Instead of appreciation, I was met with sarcastic comments, slammed bedroom doors, and constant disrespect. Every attempt to set even the smallest boundary was quickly erased by Daniel. He never corrected her. He never asked her to apologize. Instead, he always found a way to make me the problem. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. After spending nearly 10 hours at work, I came home exhausted and still cooked dinner from scratch. It wasn't anything fancy, just a healthy meal I hoped we'd enjoy together. Emma barely looked at the plate before pushing it away. "This is disgusting," she muttered, grabbing her phone as if the conversation was already over. Trying to stay calm, I simply said, "Could you put your phone away while we're eating, and maybe show a little appreciation?" Before Emma could even respond, Daniel slammed his hand on the table. His voice cut through the room. "She's not your daughter," he snapped. "Don't correct her." The silence afterwards felt heavier than the words themselves. I looked from him to Emma. Neither of them seemed to think anything unusual had just happened. That told me everything I needed to know. Later that night, while they slept peacefully upstairs, I sat alone at the kitchen island with my laptop open. If I wasn't allowed to act like part of a family, then maybe it was time to stop paying for one. I opened every bank statement, every mortgage payment, every tuition invoice, and every monthly expense. What I found would change all of our lives. I stared at the stack of overdue notices without reaching for them. For the first time since we'd been married, I felt no pressure to fix someone else's problem. I calmly closed my laptop, folded my hands on the desk, and looked at Daniel. His confident expression had vanished. The man who always had an answer suddenly looked like someone trying to stop a flood with his bare hands. "What happened?" I asked quietly. He blinked, almost offended by the question. "What happened?" he repeated. "Everything is being cancelled. Emma's school says tuition hasn't been paid. The riding academy says her account is overdue. Even the cards aren't working." I nodded once. "That's correct." He waited for more. I had nothing else to add. The silence only made him more nervous. "You need to fix this," he snapped. I leaned back in my chair. "No." That single word seemed to hit him harder than any argument ever had. "What do you mean, no?" "I was very clear the other night. Emma isn't your daughter," I replied evenly. "You told me not to interfere in your responsibilities, so I stopped." Emma stood frozen in the hallway, listening to every word. She probably expected me to apologize. Instead, she was watching something she had never seen before, me refusing. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. You know I can't afford all of this by myself. I know. You've made your point.
I haven't started making my point. His eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? It means I spent 3 years paying for a life that I wasn't allowed to have a voice in. The room fell silent again. I paid the mortgage. No response. I paid the tuition. Nothing. I paid for the riding lessons. Still nothing. I paid for vacations, clothes, birthdays, electronics, and shopping trips. Emma slowly lowered her eyes. I never asked for gratitude, I continued. I only expected basic respect. Daniel let out a frustrated laugh. So this is revenge? I shook my head. No, this is responsibility finally being returned to the person who owns it. He paced across the room. You've embarrassed us. I almost smiled. Really, I remember someone else being embarrassed this week. Emma's cheeks immediately turned red. For the first time, neither of them had a comeback. A few minutes later, Daniel disappeared into the kitchen. From my office, I could hear drawers opening, cabinet doors slamming, and frantic phone calls. First he called the school, then the riding academy, then his bank. Every conversation ended exactly the same way. He didn't have enough money. That evening was strangely quiet. No television, no laughter, no shopping plans, just whispered conversations behind closed doors. Around 9 o'clock, I walked downstairs for a glass of water. Daniel was sitting alone at the dining table with a calculator, several credit card statements, and pages of monthly bills spread out in front of him. His shoulders looked heavier than I'd ever seen them. He wasn't angry anymore. He was scared. For the first time, he was seeing the real cost of the lifestyle he had taken for granted. As I walked past him, he finally spoke. Natalie. His voice was much softer now. I think we need to talk. I stopped for only a moment. Without turning around, I answered, I agree. What he didn't know, I had already made another decision, one that would change far more than our bank accounts. The school says Emma's tuition hasn't been paid, Daniel shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. The riding academy cancelled her lessons, and both of the cards were declined. Tell me you didn't do this. I closed my laptop with deliberate calm and looked at him without blinking. A few nights ago, I said evenly, you made something very clear. You told me Emma wasn't my daughter and that I had no right to guide, discipline, or correct her. He stared in disbelief. I respected your decision. His expression tightened. So if I'm not allowed to have any parental role in her life, why would I continue paying for the responsibilities that come with raising her? She's just a kid, he snapped, pacing across the room. You're her stepmother, we're married, families share everything, you can't just pull the rug out of under us. I let out a slow breath before answering. Families also treat each other with respect. The room fell silent. For 3 years, I continued, my voice calm but firm. I paid nearly everything. Her private school, this house, her riding lessons, vacations, designer clothes, shopping trips, even some of your personal debts. I paused, and through all of it, I was treated like a wallet with a heartbeat. Daniel rubbed both hands through his hair. You've gone too far. Have I? I stood and walked toward the window.
You wanted me to be an outsider whenever it came to parenting. Well, outsiders don't finance someone else's lifestyle. I turned back to face him. You insisted I was a stranger. A faint smile crossed my face. Now you're finally learning how expensive strangers can be. The weeks that followed were nothing like the comfortable life Daniel had grown used to. His savings disappeared almost overnight. When that wasn't enough, he started taking out high-interest loans just to keep the bills from piling up. Eventually, he had no choice but to sell the sports truck he loved more than anything. Even after that, the money barely stretched from one paycheck to the next. One luxury after another disappeared. Emma's private academy transferred her records, and she was enrolled in the local public high school. Her riding lessons ended. Weekend shopping trips stopped. Designer outfits were replaced with ordinary clothes. For the first time in her life, she realized the lifestyle she'd always enjoyed hadn't been paid for by her father. The tension between them grew worse every day. Arguments became routine. Sometimes I heard shouting through the walls. Other times, the silence was even louder. Reality had finally arrived, and neither of them knew what to do with it. While they scrambled to keep everything together, I quietly focused on my next move. I hired one of the city's best divorce attorneys. Together, we organized every financial record I had carefully saved over the years. The documents proved the house had been purchased in my name long before Daniel and I ever married. Legally, there was no question about who owned it. Once the paperwork was complete, I signed every page without hesitation. A few days later, while Daniel was out meeting with another lender, someone knocked on the front door. A process server handed over an envelope addressed to him. Inside were divorce papers. Attached was a formal 30-day notice requiring him to move out of my home. No dramatic confrontation, no screaming, no begging, just consequences. Exactly 30 days later, I stood upstairs watching through the bedroom window as Daniel and Emma loaded the last of their belongings into a rented moving truck. The house that had once echoed with arguments slowly became peaceful again. Without my income supporting them, they moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. The man who had once acted as though I contributed nothing, now buried under debts he could no longer escape. As the truck disappeared around the corner, I quietly closed the curtains. Instead of sadness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. Over the following months, I renovated every room exactly the way I wanted. I invested the money I had once spent carrying everyone else. I traveled, I rested, I built a future that belonged to me. Looking back, I don't regret helping the people I loved. I regret believing that generosity alone could create respect. Love should never require you to accept disrespect. Kindness should never be mistaken for obligation. And the moment someone convinces themselves they can take your support for granted, they may discover just how valuable it truly was, only after it's gone.